The headlights of a rented sedan cut through the thick, freezing midnight fog of a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. Inside the car, 34-year-old Matthew Restelli grips the steering wheel. His hands are slightly damp despite the cold. He is exhausted, having just driven hundreds of miles from his home in sunny California. His mind is racing, balancing a fragile, delicate mix of intense anxiety and desperate hope. Matthew is here for one reason: his wife, Catherine Restelli. For months, their marriage had been fracturing under the weight of a bitter, hostile separation. A contentious, high-stakes divorce was looming on the horizon, threatening to tear their lives apart and spark a massive custody battle. But then, just days ago, Catherine's tone suddenly shifted. The icy texts and combative phone calls disappeared, replaced by soft, tearful late-night conversations. She told him she was staying with her family in Utah. She said she missed him. She asked him to drive out, leaving his familiar support system behind, under the beautiful pretense of a final, private reconciliation. Matthew wanted to believe her. He loved his family, and the promise of putting the pieces of his broken marriage back together was too powerful to ignore. He pulls the sedan up to the curb in front of a modest, picture-perfect house. The porch light is glowing with a warm, inviting yellow hue. To anyone passing by, it looks like a sanctuary of comfort. Matthew turns off the ignition, takes a deep breath to steady his nerves, and steps out into the biting alpine air. He walks up the steps, completely unaware that his arrival isn't the beginning of a second chance. It is the final movement of a trap that has been meticulously designed over weeks of encrypted text messages and hushed family meetings. As Matthew knocks on the door, the lock clicks inside. But it isn't just Catherine waiting for him on the other side. Standing in the shadows of the dimly lit hallway are Catherine's mother, Tracy Grist, and her fiercely protective younger brother, Kevin Ellis. The air inside the home isn't filled with the warmth of an emotional reunion. It is thick with an unspoken, chilling compliance. Within 90 minutes of Matthew walking through that doorway, a neighbor will dial 911 to report the sharp, deafening cracks of gunfire echoing through the suburban silence. When the first deputies from the local sheriff's department sprint across the threshold with their weapons drawn, they find a chaotic, bloody scene that looks, at first glance, like a classic case of dynamic home defense. Matthew Restelli is lying face down on the hardwood floor, a pooling crimson stain spreading rapidly across his shirt. Standing over him, holding a smoking semi-automatic handgun, is a frantic Kevin Ellis. Kevin's voice is shaking as he shouts to the deputies, claiming his brother-in-law arrived completely unhinged, flew into a violent, drug-fueled rage, and lunged at the family with a lethal kitchen knife. Kevin insists he had no choice but to pull his weapon and pull the trigger to save his sister and mother from an absolute slaughter. It is a pristine narrative of self-defense. A protective brother neutralizing an immediate, lethal threat to his household. But as forensic investigators begin laying down yellow evidence markers and mapping the physical geometry of the room, the clean story begins to fall apart. When forensic teams look at a violent crime scene, they don't listen to the emotional testimonies of the survivors. They look at the silent, objective physical data left behind by the physics of a struggle. And in the house where Matthew Restelli drew his final breath, the physical data was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with Kevin Ellis's self-defense claim. First, the investigators looked at the physical placement of the weapon. A large stainless steel kitchen knife was resting loosely inside Matthew's left hand. It looked almost staged, as a prop placed there to quickly tell a story to the first arriving officers. Detectives immediately contacted Matthew's immediate family in California to build a basic psychological profile. The response they received sent a chill through the department. Matthew was aggressively right-handed. He had zero history of using his left hand for fine motor skills, let alone wielding a weapon during a high-stress physical altercation. Why would a man lunging at his in-laws hold a knife in his non-dominant hand? Then came the definitive forensic pathology report from the state medical examiner. If Matthew had been charging forward in a blind, aggressive rage, as Kevin claimed, the entry wounds from the bullets should have been located on the front of his torso. But the autopsy revealed a completely different, horrifying reality. Matthew Restelli had been shot 3 times. All 3 entry wounds were located squarely in his back. The bullets had traveled from back to front, tearing through vital organs before lodging in his chest. He hadn't been advancing. He had been shot while facing away, completely exposed to his attacker. Realizing they were looking at a cold-blooded ambush rather than a spontaneous household tragedy, detectives seized the electronic devices of everyone inside that home. They unspooled a digital paper trail that transformed the homicide investigation from a simple dispute into a terrifying, full-blown family conspiracy. Dozens of deleted messages between Catherine Restelli, her mother, Tracy Grist, and her brother, Kevin Ellis, revealed a calculated plot that they referred to in their own words as a multi-phase operation. The state alleged that the family had collectively engineered a brutal 4-phase plan designed to permanently solve Catherine's upcoming divorce and custody anxieties without ever having to step foot inside a family courtroom. Phase 1 was the isolation, luring Matthew away from his legal team and family in California under the false promise of making up. Phase 2 was the containment, getting him inside the house late at night when neighbors were asleep. Phase 3 was the execution, Kevin ambushing him from behind while he was distracted. Phase 4 was the cover-up, staging the room, planting the kitchen knife, and coordinating their stories before dialing 911. The evidence was monumental. Facing a mountain of digital data and a potential life sentence behind bars, Catherine Restelli's loyalty to her family completely fractured. In a stunning legal development that sent shockwaves through the community, Catherine accepted a plea deal from the state, agreeing to plead guilty to her role in the setup and take the witness stand to testify directly against her own flesh and blood. The courtroom in late March 2026 was packed to absolute capacity. The air was thick with tension as Catherine Restelli walked slowly toward the witness stand. She refused to look to her left, where her brother, Kevin Ellis, sat at the defense table flanked by his legal team. Kevin sat perfectly still, his face an unreadable mask, as his own sister prepared to unseal the darkest secrets of their family home. Catherine's testimony was a breathless, psychological descent into a household completely consumed by an insular, toxic protectiveness. Under direct examination by the state prosecutor, she detailed the exact architecture of the plot. She admitted that the plan to eliminate Matthew had been discussed openly at the kitchen table over coffee, with her mother, Tracy Grist, actively participating in the logistical planning. She described how they had researched the self-defense laws of Utah, trying to find the exact legal thresholds required to make a homicide look justifiable under the state's defense statutes. They believed that if they could paint Matthew as an abusive, out-of-state aggressor invading a peaceful home, the local justice system would simply rubber stamp the incident as a tragic but legal defense of property and family. Catherine told the jury about the immense pressure she felt from her mother and brother, who viewed Matthew as a threat to their family's internal stability and financial future. She wept openly as she recounted the final minutes of her husband's life, how he had walked into the house looking relieved, believing his family was finally coming back together, only for Kevin to emerge from a dark hallway with a weapon already raised. The defense launched a blistering cross-examination, trying to tear Catherine's credibility to shreds. They argued that she was a master manipulator who had engineered the entire scenario herself, only to pin the physical execution on her younger brother to save her own skin through a convenient plea bargain. They painted Kevin as a tragic pawn, a young man who had been brainwashed by his sister's exaggerated stories of marital distress, genuinely believing he was protecting his household when he pulled the trigger. The trial ground on for weeks, becoming a national fixation. It was a case that challenged our fundamental understanding of familial loyalty, showing how easily maternal and fraternal love can corrupt into an absolute, murderous pathology. As the prosecution rested its case, the destiny of Kevin Ellis hung entirely on how the jury would interpret those 3 bullet wounds in Matthew's back versus the dark digital messages shared within the family ring. The deliberation was long, exhausting, and intensely analyzed by legal experts across the country. The jury was confronted with 2 distinct legal architectures presented by the state: a charge of first-degree intentional murder and a charge of criminal conspiracy to commit homicide. When a verdict was finally delivered in late March 2026, it contained a stunning, highly sophisticated legal distinction that caught both the prosecution and the defense completely off guard. The foreperson stood up and announced that the jury had found Kevin Ellis guilty of the first-degree murder of Matthew Restelli. The courtroom erupted into a quiet wave of gasps and emotional tears from Matthew's surviving family members. But as the clerk continued reading the form, a profound hush fell over the room. On the charge of criminal conspiracy to commit homicide, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. This paradoxical verdict revealed an incredible insight into the jury's psychological evaluation of the crime. While they acknowledged the existence of the toxic family dynamic, the text messages, and the extensive planning sessions detailed by Catherine, the jury concluded that in the absolute, exact microsecond that the trigger was pulled, the conspiracy charge didn't legally hold up for Kevin. They determined that regardless of the family plot surrounding him, Kevin Ellis had acted as a solitary agent in that final, lethal room. He wasn't a passive tool of a family committee. He was an individual who made a conscious, independent choice to fire 3 bullets into the back of an unarmed, distracted man. The jury effectively stripped away the excuse of family pressure, holding Kevin entirely accountable for the physical reality of his own actions. The judge showed absolutely zero leniency during the sentencing phase, citing the calculated, predatory nature of the ambush and the devastating emotional destruction left in the wake of Matthew's death. The court handed down the absolute maximum penalty allowed under Utah law, ensuring Kevin Ellis will spend the remainder of his natural life behind a concrete wall. The tragedy of the Restelli case leaves us with a haunting, permanent question about the nature of the people we trust most. We look at our families as shields against the dangers of the outside world, a baseline of absolute safety. But for Matthew Restelli, the family he tried so desperately to heal became the very mechanism of his destruction. The beautiful valleys of Utah are quiet once again. The suburban home on that dark street stands empty, but the lesson of the Ellis trial remains permanently etched into the annals of American true crime. It is a stark, absolute reminder that sometimes the most dangerous trap isn't set by an enemy you see coming from a mile away. It is laid out for you by the people who smile as they invite you inside, waiting for you to turn your back.